Welcome and thank you for joining me for another chapter of the Tao Te Ching. I'm Martin John. I wrote this translation and I am going through it chapter by chapter here on YouTube. When it's all done, you'll have 81 little 10-15 minute lessons around each chapter of the Tao Te Ching. So that's nice. I hope if you're getting into the Tao, congratulations. It is a great text. And there's a lot to unpack just because it is so paradoxical at times. I think this next one, Leading from Behind, chapter 66, is going to be familiar to many of us. We probably know what that looks like psychologically. I think we do. But really, it's one that we don't see practiced very heavily these days because so much is given to fame. Right? When someone's famous, they get more attention, they get more money, they get more opportunity, they get, if they're infamous, those things can fall away, especially if that shifts, right? Like, so from Rudy Giuliani to Rudy Giuliani today, right? Like being, America's mayor to, I don't know, America's bankrupt liar, right? So it's a really difficult thing. We don't lead from behind so much anymore. Let's look at what this chapter says and just break it down. There are great benefits to humility. All rivers flow to the sea because its position is lower. The master emulates this by always being a servant, inspiring from below, leading from behind. No one is oppressed. They find their way on their own. Like rivers, so too will people flow to the master, never feeling oppressed or as if they are in danger. The whole world supports her and keeps her in their hearts. Without a reason or desire to compete, she is never met with competition. I think through fear that has been sowed in our communities and in our societies, we feel like we have a reason to compete. Right? There's not enough food, there's not enough water, there's not enough land, there's not enough housing, there's not enough this, there's not enough that. So we have this desire to compete. And when we do compete, like today, I think we see a lot of coaching and a lot of all this sort of stuff where it's just like, you need someone to tell you how to live your life because you don't know. Well, if we look at the last verse, 65, it says, well, all you got to do is be aware. I think a lot of people are unaware of what is going on. And yes, there is a learning curve and it is uncomfortable, but you can get there. There are great benefits to humility. We have on our first line here, there are great benefits to humility. How many of us can say we're as humble as we can be in this moment? And I think usually we hear something or look at something or watch something and then we critique it. I blame what's his name, Jerry Springer, and his whole bandwagon of people, because when I was a kid, people weren't as judgmental openly towards others as they are now. And now that we're facing people coming out and people being who they are and people trying to live the life that they want, well, they're getting attacked, or they're getting confronted with comparison. They're getting confronted with frustration from people who are scared about like trans people and all of this stuff. Like, oh, I'm scared, and so I'm gonna I'm scared that they're gonna take over the world. I'm scared that I'm gonna lose my position or whatever. I don't know what the hell they're afraid of. So people like have sex changes, and those are going to be mistakes for some, and it's going to be perfect for others, and it's going to, who cares? Like it's not that who cares, but it's like, why are we measuring this? Why are we measuring this? And why are we not being humble to the fact that someone is going through something and we want to let them do it, right? So then we move on to this next line that leads into being a servant, right? The master emulates this by always being a servant. Support others. Inspire from below, lead from behind, get them to think about, like, what are you aware of in your life? What do you need in your life to be more you? How do you want, like, and if that leads them into doing things that you wouldn't do, we need to support it anyway. No one is oppressed. They find their own way. They find their own way. And if they're not oppressed and they're finding their own way, then it's their choice. You know, of course, children, we have to be able to put a cap on children doing things that, you know, we can't just let them find their own way. They might find themselves drowned in a river. Like, we don't want that. We want them to be guided, but we want to also guide from behind. We don't want to whip them and tell them this is what's right. Like, that's what happened to me. Now look where I'm at. but yeah, that's not the answer. The answer isn't like beating your kids into submission. The answer isn't trying to get them to be good children for you. It's about them being good for them. Like rivers, so too will the people flow to the master. You know, Confucius says, and I probably mentioned this before, you know, succeeding in a broken society is nothing to be proud of. Like rivers, so too the people will flow to the master. When that doesn't happen, you know, when there is a master who is leading from behind and doing the thing that they're doing, when that doesn't happen, it's very likely that society is broken. You know, when the rivers, like, so when the people flow to the fraud and not the master, it's because they're focused on the wrong thing. They're focused on maybe the material, or they're focused on the promises, or they're focused on fear, or they're focused on whatever. They're not trying to grow into who they are. They're growing into, you know, who they're under the influence, it should be said. Never feeling oppressed or as if they're in danger, the whole world supports her and keeps her in their hearts. So the people don't feel either oppressed or in danger when they are flowing toward the master. And the master is just getting them to become, probably, my guess, is more aware of what they're feeling and what they need and what they want, and not to jump into conclusions and answers that other people want them to be, without a reason or a desire to compete. There's no reason to compete, and there's no desire to compete within her heart. She has never met with competition. Sure, people might want to compete with her, but she doesn't get met with it. Other people are just running their own competitions, like with her in the corner of their eye, maybe. But she isn't met with it. She doesn't see it. No one brings it to her directly, so she doesn't need to compete. She doesn't need to compete with anybody for anything. And if the people that are flowing to her, to the master, move and they start following the fraud, well, what does she care? She supports them in following who they want to follow. And if they find out that he's a fraud or she's a fraud or whatever, and they come back, she doesn't turn them away. This is the way I dealt with IOP programs, intensive outpatient programs for people in recovery. You know, when I went there, I was just like, look, I don't care what you choose to do from here. I care about you. And so if you choose to go back out there, then I support that for you. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to go and get you. It doesn't mean I'm going to do anything. It only means that I support you doing what you need to do for you. And if that means going back out there, then by all means, out you go. Thank you so much for joining me for Chapter 66, Leading from Behind. I'm Martin John, and until next time, keep recovering yourself.